We used to work together at Microsoft.
Yeah.
And then we both escaped with our careers.
Well, good thing we did, because if we were still there, we wouldn't have a career.
I know. Except Blaze left.
Yeah. I know. That's all the smart people are like the last of the remaining smart people.
Robert just wrote a book, Age of Context. It was released September.
Yeah.
With Shell Israel, his co-authoring partner.
Yeah.
And it's all about kind of the ambient devices and how they're going to add more awareness to what's going forward, like, say, Ringling.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out.
Yay! Cool. And I brought a special guest too. You saw Andy. Andy was one of the 10 guys who built the iPhone, so I figured you'd appreciate meeting him. Worked at Apple, built the dashboard on the Mac, and a few other things. And ran software for Palm, so pretty much a rock star. 2 years ago, I started seeing 5 forces or 5 trends that were all happening independent. Each trend on its own was a big deal. We wrote a book 7 years ago on social software, and that's one of the trends, right? And that was before Twitter got going and Facebook and LinkedIn really got going. And the 5 forces are mobile and wearables. So Google Glass and Oakley ski goggles, and Misfit was just here, I heard. So I just saw the amount of wearables was going up exponentially. And anytime you see something happening that's going up exponentially up, you can build a business on it, and it's an important thing to pay attention to. So wearables is one. Sensors. I was just at the Consumer Electronics Show in January, and just the amount of sensors on us, around us, in our world is going up exponentially. Last year, it was like every 3 weeks a new database company like Couchbase would come along and come in my studio. And so I saw that there was a new kind of database that was coming along, and there was a lot of innovation in the data world, and that continues to this day. And then you add on the social data, a la Twitter, or Facebook, or whatever, and that's going up exponentially. Twitter today has 500 million tweets a day, which is just incredible. Actually, Eddie was the first guy to get me on Twitter, which is sort of funny.
Maybe.
Yeah, what was your number? Because I was 13,000, and you were on it a couple months before I was.
Only a couple days, actually. 13,000 something.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
so that means I'm your Twitter grandfather.
Yeah.
Around 6,000.
Yeah, see, beat us by a couple weeks. End of November 2006. Yeah, I just passed my 7-year Twitterversary. Yeah. It's pretty crazy, but I think when Eddie and I joined, I actually read every single tweet that was posted before we joined. It was like 70,000 tweets in 6 months, because it came out. I think it came out in April or May of 2006, something like that. So we joined a few months after it launched. And then location data, Foursquare and Facebook check-ins and Waze and all that is going up exponentially. The data on the internet about our world is getting sharper and sharper. So if you take those 5 trends, each one of it is interesting. I mean, wearables and sensors is really the Internet of Things, right? And there's blogs that are all about Internet of Things. But when you mix those 5 things together, it makes possible a new kind of software. At Google, they're working on a contextual operating system, and we talked to the guys who are running that team, and it's like, oh, in the future, our devices are going to know our context, whether we're running, walking, skiing, driving, giving a talk, in a meeting, shopping, and why are you shopping, on and on. And if we have a contextual operating system like that, it's quite different than the operating system that runs the Macintosh, and Andy can talk about that because he was one of the guys who built a lot of the software on the Mac. It means we can build apps and systems that do 2 things for us. One, our new devices are going to be highly personal, and you guys know this. If you get an Oakley ski goggle, it has my skiing behavior, right? If you put it on, it's my behavior, it's not yours. And talking with the guys at Oakley, they're thinking even further. They're going to put sensors in there to tell you what lens to put in based on your snow condition that you're in, right? And it just, every product, General Motors, when we talked with them, they were, well, you have a Volt, right? Yeah. And that car becomes personalized, right? Because now you can control your car on your iPhone, and it's an API. The car itself is an API that you can build applications on that your phone can interact with. And the second thing it does for us is it makes it possible a new kind of software. You know, if I get to stalk Eddie for a month and really understand him at a deep level, what kind of music does he like? Where does he go to school? Where does he work? What bars does he go to? Does he go to church? What's his favorite gas station? If I can really track you for a month, stalk you for a month, well, then I can be really your assistant, and I can get ahead of you and say, well, on your calendar tomorrow is something's happening, so here's how to augment your experience, and maybe I should get you a reservation for lunch somewhere. And Google Now is a great example, early example of this, right? Google Now, when I walked into the airport on the way back from London, it gave me my plane tickets and other information about where I was, and was trying to assist me and get ahead of me. And Google certainly wants to do that, because Google wants to do keyless searching, you know. They want to study your intent. What is your intent tomorrow? And they want to satisfy that intent with all sorts of commercial behaviors. For businesses, it means two things as well. It means we're going to need to know everything about everything. And I didn't quite understand this when I started the book, but we visited SRI, the research lab where the internet was invented, HDTV and Siri was invented, among other things. And they have a workstation there that watches you work, and it watches in real time your eyes. Where are your eyes scanning? Where is your perception? Did you perceive something? What did you type? What did you touch? Everything is stored in a database, and they showed me the system. It literally, as you look at something, another object shows up on the streaming database. Now that workstation is meant for drone operators so that they can unwind why you killed somebody, right? Because if you're running a weaponized drone, they want to know why you killed somebody. Did you follow protocol and all that stuff? And if there's a court case or a PR problem, they want to be able to unwind and say, oh, that guy or that girl actually did his or her job. But if you think, that sounds a little bit like science fiction, but last week at the web, I saw YouMove, which is a company that uses a standard webcam to watch your eyes and knows where you're looking, and is building a new kind of user interface with that. If you think about what kind of data Travis at Uber has, he knows where every piece of inventory is, every employee, every customer, every transaction, and a lot about why there's transactions. Oh, a 49ers game just got out, and that's why 50 people just said, I need an Uber cab. Yeah? He knows everything about everything, and that's changing the modern company. At Microsoft and at Rackspace, I'm reviewed every 6 months, right? But an Uber driver is rated by every rider, right? And when you get your bill, you say 1 to 5 stars. And if that driver gets too many 1-star ratings, they're fired, and somebody calls them up and says, hey, you're not going to be part of the system anymore. You're not going to be able to do this. By the way, they're rating you as well. I don't know if you knew that, but if you barf in the cab and destroy the car, they give you a 1 star, and soon you won't get picked up either. So it's
that's not personal experience.
No, but when in Paris, I made a mistake, and I got in an Uber cab that wasn't mine, and the driver was quite pissed at me, partly because he was going to get a 1-star review from the guy he was supposed to pick up, and partly I was like, oh my God, I'm sorry. What do I have to do to stay on your good graces? Because I don't want to get a 1-star either. You think about everything. Everything's being reviewed, right? Our book is published by Amazon, and we worked very hard to get reviews. By the way, even a 1-star review helps the book because there's economic activity, and that proves that book at least got bought by somebody. Where other books that don't have reviews aren't helped that way. But we worked hard to get 5-star reviews, and Now when you get authors together, that's what we talk about. It's like, how did you get 130 reviews or 800 reviews? Guy Kawasaki's book got 800 reviews, and he tells me how he did that, and his mailing list that he had to build up over decades to be able to talk people into reviewing things. So business is everything about everything. And the second lesson that I've learned from doing this book is our businesses are going to need to know our customers in very deep detail, and they don't today. We just hung out with the executive team at the Ritz-Carlton, and they really don't know anything about us anymore. And the VP of marketing said that's sort of ironic because the way the Ritz started out, when they had one hotel in New York, they had a room full of index cards, and they would go through your trash. They would write down every interaction they had with you that they could remember. So that card would have what your favorite candy bar is, how many kids that you have, do you have a mistress, all sorts of private stuff, right? Because that's how they would serve you better. Because when you walk in, it's like, hey, Mr. Grignon, would you like your normal, whiskey waiting at the bar, And it's sort of freaky, but it's also really high service value. And we're heading back into that age where they will have that index room, only it's going to be a database. And they will know when we're walking by one of these, low energy Bluetooth radios. We'll talk about that in a second. And I think Andy's new company is actually starting to think about a new platform that's using these radios. And so, that was the second thing. Our companies are going to need to know us in a far deeper detail, and we can talk about that. So this has deep implications on cities. We found that there's a new urbanist. When I grew up, my dad didn't want to live in a downtown area. It wasn't cool. And it wasn't cool for a whole lot of reasons. That's where the poor people live. That's where the high crime was. That's where the poorest service was, on and on. And so everybody in the 70s and 80s wanted to live in the suburbs. And Los Angeles is a great example of this. There is really no downtown Los Angeles. Most of the people in Los Angeles live in the suburb. It's just a permanent suburb. And now we're seeing a reverse trend where people want to live in the city, and partly because of all the new services. I have a studio here in Folsom Street, and if I forget my Apple power supply, I can have one ordered and delivered to me in less than an hour through eBay Now. I can't do that in Half Moon Bay at my house in Half Moon Bay. I can have groceries delivered from a variety of services right to my phone, here in San Francisco. I can't do that in Half Moon Bay. I can get an Uber cab. I can't do that in Half Moon Bay, and on and on. And so now we're seeing that there's a new way to live, and Jeremiah Ouyang is talking about the collaborative economy and how that's shifting, but we're seeing it have deep implications. We went to Autodesk and talked more about the city, and they showed us their whole building is censored. They have sensors in the walls for all sorts of stuff, from temperature to air quality to traffic patterns, to figure out how to reconfigure the office to work better together. They talk about, Autodesk, any modern building is designed in Autodesk software, so they can fly through the building before it was built, and so that cities are having deep impacts. We have a chapter on automobiles. We visit Toyota and General Motors and Google, certainly with the self-driving car. And your car, I think, generates 200 megabytes per second of data off of its sensors. Most of that data is thrown away in the car, but there's a lot of data. And the self-driving car is, I think, a gig per second of data as that LiDAR sweeps it up. And so we're going to have new ways to drive around and interact with our cars. We talk about health, because we visit R&D labs in Ireland that's making micro silicon-based needles that'll just wear on your skin, and it sucks a few cells of blood out and does something for that. In fact, there's a startup, I think a few blocks that way, that's in a place like this, and it has a full-on fab that's making a new blood monitor out of CCD chip, so they cut apart the CCD chip and doing all sorts of fun stuff. And so we're going to get low-cost, high-quality sensors to do all sorts of wacky things. Kevin Serace told me his company is going to have a sensor you put in your mouth, and it can tell you 24 hours in advance that you're going to have a heart attack, among other things, just because your saliva has a different chemical in it when your heart's under strain. The guys in Ireland are putting sensors inside everything, including tips of arrows for Olympic athletes to study their ability to shoot an arrow. On and on and on. So health is going to change a lot because we're going to have a sensor on us, or a package of sensors that's going to tell us we have cancer. That if you're a diabetic, you're going to know your blood glucose level without pricking your finger anymore, and on and on. And we're seeing the beginnings of that. Anybody who's wearing a Fitbit or Field Band understands how just measuring one stupid thing changes your behavior. My wife lost 40 pounds just with a Fitbit with an accelerometer on her arm, right? What else did we talk about? Then we talk about marketing, because marketing is where the money is, right? So you start thinking about, we call it pinpoint marketing. When I ran a camera store in Silicon Valley in the 80s, I'd have to spend, $15,000 for a full-page ad in the San Jose Mercury News, and I would have to advertise to everybody, hoping to hit the 50 or 100 people who were going to buy a camera this weekend. And that was very inefficient and sort of stupid. It certainly is in today's world, because in today's world, I can hit you right at the point where you're buying a camera, and Google makes billions of dollars a quarter off of this, right? You type DSLR, and it knows you're buying a camera, and I can advertise to you there. But Google is going to look very quaint in a couple of years, because not only do you know now that somebody has intent on searching, but you know that they actually have intent with a Google Glass as they're walking through a store and their gaze changes, right? Google is already patenting the ability for you to walk down a cookie aisle and know that, oh, you're just walking through the aisle. But if you stop and look at the Oreos, it has an eye sensor, it takes a picture, it knows that you're looking at the Oreo brand, and it can capture some new intent and serve you up some new thing. And that sort of is a little bit further out, because it's hard to do all that with today's technology. But Shelfbucks, that just won Demo God this year, is putting a display in the grocery aisle, in each aisle, that you tap with your phone. And it really works not just on tapping. So that Shelfbucks, I think, has several radios in it to study NFC, study low energy Bluetooth, and a few other things. So let's talk about these things, because this is a low energy Bluetooth radio. How many people have one of these on them right now? Yeah.
BLE or S?
BLE, yeah. Okay, you guys are too smart. See, this is the problem. At the web, very few people, and we spoke to a group of computer science people in Ireland, and they didn't know that. Every iPhone now has one of these built into it. So what does that do? Right now it's spitting out a number every second, and my iPhone can sense how close it is to this. So it can actually see this from about 100 meters away if you have clear line of sight. If you're going through walls and stuff, it gets less. But as I get closer to it, my phone knows that it's close to this. So if one of these is at the front of the Apple Store, which is already the case, and I walk in with the Apple app, it knows that I just walked into the Apple Store and can do something. And if there's another one at the iPad display, as I get over to the iPad display, my phone can change. And we'll talk about that with Andy a little bit. This is radically changing how I think about everything. I just had dinner with Michael Sippy, who runs product at Twitter, and they're playing with these, both in your phone and local ones, to think about a new kind of social network. Why can't I just build automatically a social network of this room, and instead of having a hashtag, convince you all to hashtag this talk so I could see all your tweets? Why can't I just see all your tweets automatically in Glass as I give a talk? That's coming, no problem. And so on that, let's introduce Andy. Come on up here, Andy. So Andy's my friend from Half Moon Bay. You worked for Apple, for 12 years?
I was at Apple for about 11 years, and when I was there, I started off doing a bunch of software for Mac OS. So I wrote Dashboard, iChat, some of those early apps, and then eventually I went on to go do some iPod stuff that never made it to market. And then about 10 of us got together and started iPhone. Obviously, the team grew. We made a couple of them that didn't quite get to market, but the one that mattered did.
Yeah.
And so
you had some prototypes in your house of...
no, I don't.
Oh, you don't?
It's right there. And then as soon as we shipped iPhone, I went over to Palm and started something called WebOS. And so my background has been mostly big operating system-y kind of things. Dashboard was started because at the time we wanted to enable regular people to be able to write apps for Mac OS. Regular people at the time were people who could do like JavaScript and HTML and CSS, right? But they didn't have to know Objective-C. And then with WebOS, it was just dashboard widgets expanded out to the operating system level. Still with the same thinking that regular people could develop apps. We missed the mark on that because regular people, they don't know how to develop any kind of software, right? I mean, just even doing a tweet. Twitter has what, like 10% of their user base can be bothered to actually write a tweet. And that's a content creator, right? So how do you get back to making a product that's approachable by everybody? So we got a few of us together. I've got two co-founders. We started a company about almost 2 years ago. We're all Apple guys. Bill Bull is our guy that did the design for the iPod Classic. He did design for QNX and BOS way back in the day, and ran mobile design at Yahoo. And Jeremy Wild is the other one. And Jeremy and I've been at every company except for Palm together, but he was also stayed on as part of the iPod and iPhone teams instead of coming to Palm. Made a lot more money that way, so I should have gone there. So we got ahead. We got together and we started to solve the problem, which was how do you make a thing? And this was about as specific as it got back then. How do you make a thing which allows regular people to make stuff? That's a pitch that really doesn't go well with venture people. But if we have to, we got this thing, we got this idea. Well, it turns out it was actually we were able to raise a bunch of money and start building it. So it's taken us a long time to figure out how to do it. I'm going to show you what we've been doing.
Well, I saw your original pitch. You didn't even bring out a computer. You just had a deck of cards. You don't have the cards on you, do you?
I don't. I might. I can probably show you a little later. Yeah. I might actually.
But your designer drew these baseball cards, basically, and you just slap down cards and talk about what if somebody could make this kind of thing and then this kind of thing just out of cards.
And that was one of the things I learned when I went to go pitch was. They see 1,000, PowerPoint and Keynote prezos a day. I mean, it's just, you have to do something. What's your hook to differentiate? And so we brought out a little deck of cards, and that was my little pitch. We actually built something, virtually just by playing some cards. But then it required you to use your imagination because we didn't have the software in yet. But I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we announced at Le Web with Robert here. Let me make sure this is going to go up there. Can you guys see okay? You can't see me right now. So, I'm running this on the sim. Normally I would demo it on the tablet, but we weren't able to get the projector to work. We do some funny stuff with the TV, and so if you just were to do AirPlay mirroring, that wouldn't work, and I'll tell you why. So this is something we've announced called 8ly, number 8, E-I-G-H-T-L-Y. 8ly is a contextual platform, a contextual publishing platform that allows regular people to make these things we call channels. And if you think back to way back in the day, there was, you guys may be too young for this, but there was a product called HyperCard. And HyperCard allowed you to drag buttons and pictures and stuff like that and create a HyperCard stack. And that was like the very early approach to programming.
Yeah. Windows had Visual Basic, which is sort of a further idea of that, of just dragging buttons on a form.
Right? It was that same idea, but what happens when, in that same kind of mindset, when you start to go, in today's world, we've got services, Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, we got just stuff everywhere. And then we've got devices, Apple, iOS, and we have this really fabricated mess of stuff. And how do you make a channel that You have an idea for something you want, and you want it to run on a phone, on a tablet, and on a TV. Very different experiences across all three.
And maybe a watch and a glass.
Maybe a watch and glass as we start to, how do you future-proof?
Because you already got this runtime running on a glass, right?
On a glass as a hack, and I'll show you kind of what we did. So this is what you're looking at is what 8ly looks like when you go to make stuff. I'm just gonna dive right in to show you just a brief little demo of what it's like to make something.
This is coming next year, by the way, right?
Yeah. So the idea was, okay, our source code, our building blocks was cards. Remember when I went in to do the pitch, it was like building cards. Well, some people can play cards. That's a little hard, but this here is a little template. So this is Planet Earth. This is like a shared album to just gift up to your friends. And when you kind of open it up, you can customize it with some stuff. This one's actually not filled out because this is a demo build. But the idea here is you just give it a name. Where do your pictures come from? Do you want a background soundtrack? It's like filling in your LinkedIn profile. You just type in a little bit of form, you say go, and there's like your resume. This is that same idea, but for a whole channel. So you just fill out a couple things, click go, and then it goes. But I'm going to show you what it's like to actually build something from scratch, from cards. So those little things there, those are the cards that we did.
So is a channel like a new kind of app?
It's a new kind of app. You have to be careful about not calling it an app, because that really means it's a heavily overloaded word. A lot of people mean that's native code running on a device and all sorts of stuff, and that's actually not what we're doing. It's not a VM either. This is not Java. We're trying to run some other language inside of a simulator. This is actually very different. So this is our source code. Our source code is a bunch of cards, and everything is color coded. It's actually meant to be highly approachable to a regular person. A kid should be able to build a channel with some cards. And so you'll notice a couple things in here. I mean, where it might apply to some of you, I've got this Estimote card here. This is exporting a bunch of Estimote functionality into the channels that are created. But I'll show you what that means in a second. So to actually start creating our channel, we just click on this. Let's give it a name. What I did at the web is that I had this whole French thing going on, and so that doesn't really make much sense here. I'll just call it Highway 1. That's good. And so you can customize, give background, all this other stuff. But this is the starting place. When we look at the details, this is as complicated as building a channel gets. You've got a couple little wells here, right? So you've got content, you've got some rules and enhancements, and this link is the structural elements, the scene. When we look at things like extras, tap on that. It's weird to demo it on a laptop, even though this is how we developed it. It's always a little more easier on a tablet. So this is a theme. So we have a city theme card. So I'm going to show you what all this means in just a second. We just drop a card, and now we've got a theme of city. Well, what does that mean? We're going to see. But let's go ahead and add some structure to this. This will tell me all the cards that I can play. And this is just going to be an introduction screen. Go ahead and let's just take a look at what that is. Highway 1, welcome. There's not much here. But let's go ahead and add some stuff. So this one has some content. I'm going to add some content here real quick. Let's add my calendar for the day. This is calendar events. It'll tell me exactly where to put it. This environment guarantees success, meaning you're not going to be able to play a card that doesn't make any sense or doesn't work with anything else. So like when you go ahead and create a keynote or a PowerPoint, you're trying to debug your presentation. About as hard as it gets is moving a little slider because your little sparkly text didn't come in. That's about as complicated as I want to make it for this. So where do my calendar events come from? I use Google. So if I just drag the Google card, play it on there. Now I have a calendar coming from Google. What's it look like? That's what you want to know. I'm not going to show you this yet. So one more thing here. Let's add some stuff at the bottom of the screen. I want a little footer at the bottom. I want to make it a short footer. And then what do I want there? Let's add some quotes. Quotes can be anything, right? They can be like from Facebook or anything else like that. But let's go ahead and grab some from Twitter. So we take this card, drop it on in there. What are we looking for, though? What kind of quotes? Well, let's look for something. Let's see what people are saying about the web. So this is going to do a live search for quotes about the web with a calendar. So really kind of abstract, but let's take a look. So we click preview. This is our channel. This is the city theme that specifies the font and the look. There's my calendar. That's all real. My real calendar today. I hurt my ankle in Paris, and I really tweaked it. I gotta get looked at. But these are tweets as people are talking about on the web. So this is really no program. We've made something very pretty, and it brought together data from Twitter, data from Google, And then just to go a little bit further with that.
So this is resolution independent because you could show this to me on a phone
You'll
and
know
on
that,
TV.
exactly. You know there's nothing in here that says I want a 30-point white Helvetica anything. Because as soon as I give you that control, I can't make it work on a watch. Right? So what we have to do is give you the element of here's a menuing system, here's a screen, you can put content there. We can degrade that experience all the way down to a glass. In fact, I did that for one of our things. But I'm going to show you one thing here real quick.
So your company really built a lot of complexity underneath because you had to come up with your own.
There's a whole new language.
What format?
Yeah, there's a whole new language. There's a whole new, under the covers, there's a whole new wave. This is spread between the cloud and the device because some of the data we get comes on the device, on the iPad. Some of it comes from the cloud. All these services are just running inside of a Node.js environment. But let's go ahead and get some stuff going. I'm going to quickly assemble a thing here. I want some pictures on here. And I want the pictures to come from.
Is there a way you can maximize the screen?
No, the simulator doesn't let me do that. It's kind of a, and I apologize for that. I'm kind of stuck.
Afterwards, we could show it to you on an iPad.
Let's throw some flower pictures. Get some pictures here. Let's go ahead back and add some more crap to the bottom. Oops. Gotta go back. See, it didn't let me play that card because it didn't make any sense in the scene. So it just kind of shuttled it back. But this I can play the card, so I bring it there. And then let's add some more stuff. So let's go ahead and throw some calendar. People is the card that is probably most interesting because that's it's all the other users of 8ly. And what People does is it uses all the sensors available. So the Bluetooth LE stuff uses GPS to find out if another 8ly user is around you. And then you can do stuff on that. We're not going to be able to do stuff with it in the simulator because, as you know, it doesn't allow you to actually have access to the BLE stack on the simulator, but I can show you on the device. So now we've got a screen, some content, some photos, a bunch of stuff at the bottom, and let's just go ahead and run through it. Again, I've been building this while I've been talking. It hasn't really taken any work to let us. Now we've got a little get started link. Of course, you can rename all that stuff. And then when we go to get started, now this is going to be looking on Flickr for photos about flowers. Right now at the bottom, you'll see called Jeremy. That was my calendar item. Jeremy, this is since I'm running in the simulator to debug, I wanted to have just some content there. So Jeremy's just showing up there. And then we have tweets coming through. So we have this now a streaming set of data and all sorts of things like that. On the actual device, what we did and demonstrated on stage was I had mapped these estimates to people in our system. So it's just a number to a person. And then we had these up on the front of the stage. They just kind of, all the team showed up, and then Robert came by. He had one with him. And so then as he got close, it started to kind of put this little throbby thing over his face, just to show that, that he was there. And then as he, walked away, it automatically stopped. But then you can do things like, when he's close, what I really wanted to show off on stage was when Robert got real close, I wanted to have it automatically show, do a really cool animation of a full screen scene that showed all of his most recent social activity, right? So drag on like Twitter and Google Plus and all this other stuff. And then as he walked away, it would just kind of flip away. Now there's a lot of interesting use cases for that, but it just required playing just too much activity. So where this I think is maybe most interesting to you as you start to build your products, one of the things that this solves is eliminating the whole front end stack. It also enables regular users to do interesting stuff with the data that you create. Right now, Fitbit and Jawbone each create a whole bunch of data about what you're doing, but it lives in their own silos. So customers of each one can have competitions, but only within their individual silo. With 8ly, you'll be able to play a competition card, and then you play a Fitbit and a Jawbone card, and you pick what it is, whatever you're competing against. Competition to us is just win, lose, or draw. You can compete against sports, the weather, Fitbit, cars, Tesla, Volt. It doesn't matter. You can compete as long as we can deduce win, lose, or draw. So
if we use this to build like a museum app, can you track what pictures I was next to if each one has a BLE on it?
Yeah, and it gets really interesting when we start to incorporate then this data from the outside world. We have to figure what are the most intelligent use cases where people want to start to apply that, because we have to build out those hero cases and make those work really well. But then have that flexibility. It's just like when you do a new platform, you start to think, what does this particular API I'm opening up do? Right? And you have a use case for it, But then developers kind of get their mitts on it, and they do stuff that you never thought was ever in the use case scenario chain. And so that's the whole point. Go ahead.
So how does it work then on a different device, whether in a glass or a watch or
So in the example, what I showed Robert, one of the first things we built was this thing called Disaster Earth. And we took a data feed from like the Hungarians that just had all this real-time data feed happening of just everything going wrong on Earth. They power like those war room kind of things. And we had built an app which had a nice big 3D globe, very pretty, and it kind of spun around depending on what continent you were on. And all the data kind of slid on in from the side, and it showed you, oh, hey, there's a lost nuclear fuel rod in Dallas. One of the things that actually happened. And then you tap on it, and then it all kind of goes to this big, rich experience. How would you port that to glass? Well, you're not going to put a globe and all this really rich spinny stuff. You don't just make it smaller. And you also don't have all this other stuff. You don't have that kind of control. So what we did was we just degraded the globe experience down into the 4 items of text that were mostly relevant based on the GPS of, well, actually your phone, not on the glass. But it just pulled the most recent or the most localized disasters coming from your glass. But then you could go down and actually then go into the text detail breakdown that showed all of the crazy stuff, the text of that. And then you could back out of it. But we didn't allow selecting different continents or things like that. But
so you have built a runtime for each, or you
well,
have
so it runs on. So it has to run inside of A-Lake. And so when we create all these blue cards are the ones that we have to make sure that they have a downgraded and upgraded version of, and that's our structural elements. Everything else is just a service and a data provider that live in the sky.
And then so you have sort of that intelligence built into the platform to say if I'm on the Mac, it's this experience. If I'm on glass, it's this experience, and this content is what's most relevant, and that's what you're going to show on glass.
Yeah, and each one, so like the calendar. If when you look at our little demo here, when we play this channel, you'll notice the calendar in this view shows my whole day's worth of calendar. And it's the same object under the covers, but it's given a certain view rectangle, and it's got some hints under that you never know, you as the user never know. But when we go to this next screen, we do something a little different with it. Same exact data, but now we're just showing it in a much smaller version. It's not, the whole day, the idea is that it would kind of flip to the next one, right? But it's taking that exact same code path, and it's just drawing it slightly differently. Now, when you degrade that down to a watch, you take away all this other visual stuff, and you just display just the most meaningful part, which is the time. And
are you going to have the new input methods that like Glass has? Because Glass can tell where I'm aimed, so maybe you can show a set of restaurants that way.
Yeah, and that's now we start to get into like those. What are the actual experiences look like? And this is where we have to start parting down everything up and down, and so that when we introduce a new platform, all the cards that we build have to have that kind of experience.
And isn't that where these kind of lowest common denominator platforms fall apart, when you really want high input?
Yeah,
version
and that's always been the problem. If you were to port this to a Pebble, or what would this look like on? I haven't done it. I'm just asking kind of the hypothetical, but. I can think of, I met with Eric and I kind of showed him some of this stuff, and I can imagine how we would do that. But it's not going to have this kind of rich visual fidelity that it would on a tablet. And same thing for this, by the way. When we put this on a TV, it actually looks a little different, right? Because we got a lot more real estate to deal with. Text has to be bigger. This text isn't legible on a TV, so you have to make it a little bit bigger. You have to reflow a lot of things to make a meaningful experience out of it. So
go back to how you sold this, because there's 11 companies here right now, something like that. Where are you with your companies? Are you funded yet? Are you going to get funded? Tell me a little bit. How early stage are you guys right now?
Our company is funded.
Anybody else?
We've got a prototype ready at the minute, but looking for funding.
Yeah.
Recently funded.
Recently funded. Nobody gets funded.
Just started looking for funding.
Yeah. So what was it like? Because you raised money from everybody from a sports star to.
We had a pretty eclectic,
Who were your
batch
investors?
of people. We were initially seed funded by True Ventures, and then we took another round. It was led by Jerry Yang and Ash Patel from Yahoo. We got Google Ventures, some people at New York Beta Works and Layer Ventures, Ronnie Lott, who's a 49ers football player. Each one, though, once you finally get that traction, getting funded, at least my experience was I wanted each investor to add something of value. So when you try to sell a platform like this, it's a really hard thing to say, one of the first questions you get asked is, who's this for? And they want to hear your accelerator 2-line, what's your really quick pitch. And then you can get in and start to do that next layer. When you have a platform like this, and it's the same thing for iOS or WebOS, which is like, well, who's iOS for? It's for everybody. What can you do with it? Well, anything. Well, that doesn't help. So what you have to do then is part the problem down, right? So you say, all right, it is for anything. It can be for anybody, but our first verticals are going to be music, news, sports, and family. And so we can build a halo experience around each one of those. So who can, of our investors, add value? So Ronnie can add, and has already started making some big introductions, to the sports arenas, and then some of the media guys are helping us with news. Blair is a heavily news-focused one. So that, for me at least, I'm sure everybody's is a little different, but because what can they add? What's that value that a new investor is? So and having just money is great, right? But at some point, you need some connections too, and having the right set of people help.
Who actually is it for? Is it for businesses to create apps for their brands, or is it for consumers to basically control their digital lives?
So I won't lie. When we started this, we're consumer guys. We're customer. Everything about our background is about the consumer. Some of the easiest and most compelling experiences that we've been making and that we've been thinking up have actually been business focused. Like when we talked about to the Ritz, the guy around all of Ritz marketing was like, let's talk. As soon as you're announced, we got to build some stuff with this, and that's a really interesting kind of big business play. And as I've been looking about experiences for the Eskimos and just beacons in general, there's so many obvious ones but they're all around the business. Right, you got a nightclub or something, and you want to have the bouncer walking up and down the line, and you want to pull out your VIPs. You're not going to know them just by looking at them. But if you have somebody who's part of your fan club, and then just like with the demo we gave on stage, this thing starts throbbing, and it's her name is here's her dossier, Joey Bag of Donuts, and here's what he does, blah blah blah, and then the body, come with me. Those are really easy experiences that you can make. We practically built it on stage already. And how do you enable that? But everything we've created has been, how do you allow a regular person to do something with their data, right? We've been feeding customers app experiences in the way we pictured them. I mean, Apple, we were the epitome of this, right? You get what you get because we know best. But then they've never had that power to say, well, what if I could just do this with it? Just modify it and change it a little bit. And so that's, I think, where we're most passionate and what we can enable and make the biggest change. But
are you doing anything deeper with the Internet of Things? Like in just the last couple of months, I got Nest thermostats,
Yep.
I got some Philips Hue lights, I got a Revolve home automation system, and at the web I saw something that's like a Nest but controls my garden.
Yep.
Are you thinking about how to use that?
I've been thinking about a lot. In fact, I advise a few companies on the Internet of Things stuff, and so I've been. It's kind of a give and take, right? I'm helping them with some of my experience, but also they're giving me some really great ideas for how we can use some of what they're doing and create it and allow regular people. So again, they want to have, if you're your Fitbit, right? You have your Halo experience. This is the Fitbit experience, right? But and they all have APIs. Everybody has an API, but nobody's building anything with it because there's only a small pool of programmers. Not many of us are athletic, but they can craft an experience around one vertical thing. It's probably going to look like shit because they're not a developer or they're not a designer, right? So how do you encapsulate really great design, a lot of functionality, so that a regular person can have something that's pleasurable to use and kind of fun. And so when you guys, I don't know anything about what you guys are doing, but if you were probably with a piece of hardware, I'm sure, especially the sensor-based ones, are generating APIs and streams of data. It's very simple. Again, Instagram is all of 60 lines of JavaScript that runs in the cloud, and that opens up all of the Instagram functionality. And so it's not hard. It's just a matter of doing it, and then you give power to the people. That's did not come out the way I.
What was it like working at Apple, and how does that differ from doing startup? And is there lessons for a lot of the people here at PCH or this accelerator is funded by PCH.
Yeah.
And I visited the supply chain that Lee and Casey built over in Shenzhen, China.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of Apple people over at his hotel room. Yeah, so what was that like? Yeah.
Apple, maybe the difference was more striking when I was at HP. Apple was very much, when I was there, very Steve dominated. And it was just a go, which is great. We got to build some really cool stuff. But HP, we didn't have Steve, for sure. HP is you and 330,000 of your closest friends, all in just one big environment. And
how many HR people were at HP?
HR alone was, I think, about 2,000 people. All of Palm was, at the time of the acquisition, like 900 and something. So we were doubled up in HR alone. I was a VP. I was a VP of software over there, and I was one of an elite member of, I think, 5,000 VPs. It's just a scale that is just. And so, you don't have to do anything. You have to wipe your own butt. I mean, you just went to meetings and you did your thing. You didn't make anything, really. And then coming to a startup, I remember when and you guys have all experienced this, and I remember, we got our office and like the trash is piling up. I was like, well, let's take out our garbage. And like nobody was. So I'm sitting there like hauling garbage out to the dumpster and stuff like that. I don't know, that to me is just, that's just one example, but everything that, you guys know this, right? Everything you have to do is all your own. And it surfaced when we went to the web, right? All of a sudden, you're now thinking about what's your announcement plan, right? I mean, I know some PR people, and I've done some stuff, but you have to have copy for your website. What's it say? Who, right? There's just all this stuff that's not my, certainly not my skill set. But when you've got just bodies you can throw at the problem at these big companies, it just comes out of nowhere. And so that was when we got up on stage, right? That was like we were turning, we're backstage. We got a few thousand people in the audience, and the three of us engineers, the co-founders, were spinning builds like an hour before. So I got on stage with a build that was like an hour old because it wasn't really working all that well. But all at the same time, we have to have the website going live. Oh shit, we forgot about the copy, and so somebody else is like massaging, what is the actual website saying? Just all this stuff was certainly an eye opener. It was very stressful, but it was quite.
But it wasn't the same launch in the iPhone.
Well, yeah, that's actually fairly well documented. There's a book called Dogfight, and it's about Apple and Google, and it tells the inside story about kind of the creation, certainly from iPhone, the first 3 chapters of that book. And the book starts off with my drive from my house in Campbell at the time up to Moscone, just like that gut-wrenching, like this is the day before, right? You just have like this awful, what the hell's going to happen, right? And the experiences. When you go through the demo, the rehearsals, you just saw something kind of go wrong every time. And it wasn't going to be good if that went wrong. And so, the book actually does a really interesting job of illustrating, because, a bunch of us told some of the stuff. There's not like no trade secrets. It's just funny, random, maybe not so funny, but just awful experiences of bringing that to market. But it was tough. But, I don't know that this announce was, it was still just as stressful. We didn't really drink. When we were announcing the iPhone, I had a 750 ml of scotch that we brought, and we were up in the front, so we had like 6 or 8 of us in a row who was responsible for each part. He starts off by saying it's a music player and it's a phone, it's all this other stuff, right? So each one of those demos was very heavily segmented, and as soon as whoever was responsible for that part was done, they had to take a shot. And then you're sitting there, you're all gonna throw up while he's like doing your stuff, and then it's over, and you're like, all right, next guy. And then at the end, he does like this grand finale, which was just everything, right? He's ordering 4,000 lattes from Starbucks and playing music and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And then at the end, it all worked, and we all just. And so we got pretty hammered by the end of that. Like that was a bit of a shit show that day. But I think that just kind of illustrates that, that just the amount of stress and so I was amazed we didn't actually do anything like that. We should have.
Well, we threw it down in London.
That's true.
Yeah. What's it like building just a software startup versus intermixing it with the hardware.
It's a lot easier, man. It is a lot easier.
Tell me some of the stories of what it took to get your software to run on iPhone when another team is building the hardware.
iPhone was an interesting case because there wasn't a stable variable in the stack. When you go from like silicon up, I mean, we built a custom processor. One of my teams was responsible for, you get a new piece of metal from your manufacturer, from your fab, you have to do a bunch of stuff to see can it like add. Like, can it address memory? You start off with the most fundamentally basic, like, does it have fingers and toes? And then you grow a whole set of tests on top of that to see if it can do. And you find some really surprising stuff where it doesn't work. So then you have to have them spin another chip for you really quick, and it's just a total hack job. But here it is. Now try it. But down to the processor core, it wasn't stable. Normally you can say, we're just going to use this part, this core. And even if you're doing a custom thing where you just take ARM core, this graphics core, a couple of UARTs in there, those are all usually stable building blocks. But when you start to really do some custom stuff, you can't trust any of that. It was a hardware design that we'd never built a phone before. And
Steve even kept you from hiring people who had built a phone before, right?
Yeah, that was actually, the story there was, I was the guy that had to pitch visual voicemail to AT&T the first time. And so when you're a software guy, visual voicemail is an easy thing. It's IMAP. And it's a mail thing. I mean, the messages are attachments, all the metadata is who it's from, and that's easy. So again, we were kind of in our own little cocoon. Just about to step on stage, and it's like this big dysfunctional wedding. It's like AT&T people over here and Apple people over there, and I get up and I'm like, all right, here's this. The whole team had kind of prepared. This wasn't going in blind. They had done their homework too. We get up and I start talking about it, and the woman who was the CTO at the time for AT&T all but like patted me on the head and said, "You don't quite understand how visual voicemail systems work. Here is, what were my counterpart on AT&T to basically rebut, and why this was so difficult, and how we couldn't do this, and et cetera, et cetera." And ultimately we ended up crying to Steve, and Steve made it all better at the CEO layer. But you kind of where Robert was saying was go back like 6 months or so before that, and Steve told me I was not allowed to hire any phone people to make a phone. How that we don't know what we're doing. We're Mac desktop people. We don't know what the hell a phone does. I mean, we do, but and he's like, no, I don't want anybody tainting. This is too secret. This is too da 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 da. And that stopped me from, because I had these guys from Nokia that I was going to go after. I had some Moto guys, and we had to put the kibosh on all of it. So thinking back from what my experience was when I pitched it, had I brought one of the Moto or Nokia people on board, we would have killed the idea inside first, right? Because he's like, you guys don't understand. Like, visual voicemail systems are really complicated. They don't work that way. But it would have been inside of ourselves, telling us that we can't do it. Versus, I had to be the sacrificial guy, just getting up there and saying, "Hey, what do you think?" And then, no, you don't get to do that. But that's how you escalate it up. If we were to be the ones that said, we can't do this because it's really that hard, we never would have been able to go, to that next step. And then, but the other element of that was learning, kind of that hard way, building the brain trust of how do you create this new thing. Because at the end of it, people quit, and you don't want to have that all of the iPhone knowledge in the person that we hired from Nokia who knew how to make a phone. That would be really bad. But now, if we kind of learned organically and built it up from scratch, now we've got a dispersed, crew of people that you can fall back on.
How much time does that add to the process?
It had quite a bit, but honestly, that wasn't the other things. Going back to the whole unstable stack. I mean, we were all learning all the way up, and so it added some time. But other people needed time, and we needed time. It was
About doing that for a startup building.
What's that?
What do you think about doing that as a startup?
Oh, I think it would be suicide. I think we hit problems, and I can't talk about this one in particular, but we did hit a problem that about stopped the whole program in its tracks, and we had to fly. The way chips are made, it's all VHDL, and it's really a software program that gets made into metal, and we had a problem where we had to fly people that wrote the source code for the chip and put them in a room, and we had to step through. And I don't think, and that was a showstopper. Like we were tanked at that point. But I don't think a company, and this was, by the way, with Apple's incredibly deep bench, some of the smartest people in the industry looking at it, along with the guys who wrote the code for the chip, along with, and you just have like, how would a startup do that? Like it can't. And not to say that that wouldn't be, that what happens to you, but I just, knowing, having now gone through it, I think that would be, I think there's ambitious. I think there's doing something big that changes the world, and then there's a suicide mission. And, and I don't know where like the line is drawn, to be honest. But by all intents, that we shouldn't have succeeded. But yeah.
So was Steve's reason for not letting you hire phone guys, was it because he wanted to keep it secret, or was it because he didn't want you to be influenced by their limitations of what they had found?
I think it was, I think I never articulated it that way, but so I'm kind of divine. He just said no, and that was good enough. Right?
When God says no, you don't argue too much.
But yeah, we did, the funny thing, even though I went to Palm, all of the first of us, we all bought Trio 650s as our phone, and that was the phone we didn't want to end up with. And so we want to get really familiar with it and know kind of what's the state of the art, because it was back at the time. It was, they had the little Nokia antenna, and it was a cool phone at the time. That's what everybody wanted, but we didn't want that. And I think Steve was really pushing for, really, like that's probably the embodiment of Think Different, right? Go back and take what we know from these really great desktop experiences, and can we just cram all that shit into a thing like this? And you should. The first prototype, it was again with custom boards and all that sort of stuff, but it spanned like one of these tables and then kind of a little one off to the side. And it all culminated in a tiny little screen that wasn't even the right thing. It didn't have any of the stuff that we know that iPhones have. But it took all of that crap to be able to make a phone call and just show like the basics of all this stuff running. And it was really cool then to see all that just kind of into this. And that was pretty crazy. I was the guy that took the first phone call on ever made on an iPhone. And I didn't know who it was, and I sent it a voicemail. So it wasn't like the Alexander Graham Bell moment of like, oh hey, no. It was like, fuck, I don't know those guys. And they left a voicemail like, dude, I'm calling from the iPhone, or whatever it was, the code name at the time. Decidedly less romantic than having a yeah. So
cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
In there.
I guess this is more of a theoretical question, but what's going to happen? A lot of us are building stuff to make our lives easier and make things more automated, but what are people going to do with that time once they have that? Are we expecting them to learn faster? Are we expecting them to relax more?
Watch more porn.
Yeah. Yeah, watch more,
Also the first guy to do that. You know what? I think the beauty of it is you're giving that back to them to decide. And when you give somebody a bunch of free time, if they, part of it is it depends on the person. If they're naturally curious, maybe they'll spend more time. Might have the inverse effect of if you give them 1 unit of time and you were able to make them half a unit more. So you could achieve the same amount of work in half a unit. Now that gives them maybe some extra time they maybe want to play with it. I don't know. But the important thing is it's giving it back to them. To me, it's, the Uber example is great, right? I mean, the idea, we were just in New York and London and Paris. I use it everywhere. And I had all this extra time just because I didn't have to sit there like doing this. You could just so I spent my extra time hanging out with friends at a bar. And then, just getting a little bit more drunk. So then I could just go out just when the driver came up and then go, right? Didn't puke in any cars though, so. Yeah.
When developing the iPhone, where did you start and how did you delegate different tasks to your team?
So we had, for our teams, we were responsible for all that, kind of the lower level system, all the radios, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, the baseband, which makes the phone calls, manufacturing line, all that bunch of stuff. And so we were heavily overloaded. So we had this one guy was responsible for coming up with how to talk to the modem. And he also did some stuff around the Bluetooth stack. And one guy did Bluetooth and Wi-Fi because they were actually very similar, even though they were different chips. And so initially it was delegated based on interest, kind of what people wanted to just do. And then it quickly got into someone's got to eat their vegetables, right? And so you have to do the boring stuff that nobody wants to do. So hopefully you kind of spread it out so that there's some fun stuff, and then there's the you're not going to find anybody to do, and not even the intern's going to take it. So, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And there was probably, I'm kind of probably misremembering some of the things, but there were moments where it felt hopeless. Nobody was happy. It was miserable. And then you kind of celebrate those successes when you make your first call, or even smaller than that. Here's the first piece of hardware that came back from China, right? And you're just like, everyone's amped up again. And then you have like those kind of fits and starts of making a new thing. And I can't. In every project, I worked on the iSight to the camera that we shipped as part of iChat. And I remember when we first, there's all this misery like trying to get this camera built. And then when the first units came back, everyone was just kind of like, oh, God, I don't want to deal with it anymore, whatever. And the first units came back off of the plane, and that was where everyone's all excited. I can't wait to try it now. And then you got the driver people who are all excited about hopping back into it. And so I think new hardware, when it comes off, I think that's one of the big advantages that hardware has, to be honest, over software. Because the only successes we celebrate are the ones that we, can light up ourselves. When you have like a team of hardware people coming in with like, hey, here's this cool thing. Now, that's one of the neatest things about hardware is just having a thing. Right? You have something tangible and concrete. And even if it looks like crap, it's still.
There was a day that somebody burned 6 of the best prototypes or something like that.
That was, that was a bad day.
Talk about that. Because these guys probably have gone through that.
So we had so this was, whatever it was probably the weeks, month, whatever, before we introduced at Moscone, and so was that January of 2007. And so we recreated the whole stage inside of Apple's campus, and then you package everything up, and then you take it over to the stage, and then the stage people recreate it. And the units the units were left behind. Everything else had been moved over to Moscone. But we had some really bad problems that we had to fix before they could actually go. So we had all of our units, and so my team was doing some fixes around.
The units you had were all rated by how they looked, and
So the way it works is when you get new, especially aesthetic units, cosmetic units back. The way it worked back then was Steve and Johnny put on like little gloves and the jeweler's loop, and then they would inspect every phone, and then they grade them. So AAAs, AA's, A's, whatever. Those are the best. And then you get to B's, C's, whatever. When you have like noticeable gaps, so you can put your fingernail in. Whatever it is, you kind of grade the units, and so you have really great units that could withstand like somebody holding it and like looking at it. And then there's the ones that are probably best, far back that nobody can really see that level of detail. And so we had spun a build for some horrible thing that we had done wrong on the baseband. And these units were naked. They weren't flashed with anything. They were just kind of stage units. They were from China, and we hadn't put any software down. We had a bug. We fixed the bug. We tested on our stuff. We released it, and everyone's like, "All right, good." QA tested. Everything's good. And they go to burn it onto the phones for the first time, and there was a bug. It turns out. We were relying on some data that was already down on the phone from a previous install in this bug that we had fixed, and it wasn't there. And this particular chip, there's a security feature which allows you to blow a fuse that if it sees a security problem. So you actually, when people say I break my phone or whatever, usually you can recover from a break. It just means something's gone wrong, and you can JTAG in or do whatever you have to do to fix that. But this, because that data wasn't there, the processor rebooted a few times, and then it blew the fuse. And so the device was like that. You can't fix that. Problem is, they started with AAAs and AA's, and we did them 8 at a time. Because you plug them all in just to save time. So we burned up our best units just by just by saying, let's do it, just to make it a little bit faster. Guess what we never did again. Like that, but those were units that then you could put behind a little glass dome, and you can still. I mean, they just were off, right? Let's not look at those too closely. But yeah, so my advice, as it comes to you guys, if you're only making a few of anything, don't ever do a lot of one. Just if you got 4 units, don't gang program all 4 at the same time with new software, especially if you got to go back to China to have them made again. Like experiment with one, and then do it. That was kind of a hard lesson. Yeah.
I had a question. A lot of us are building, apps for iOS. What would you suggest, as far as like some of the other platforms like Google Glass and Pebble? I mean, would you kind of encourage startups to look into those ecosystems to kind of get a competitive advantage?
Honestly, there's a saying, pioneers get the arrows. And it's the first mover advantage sometimes pays off, but oftentimes it doesn't. And so the amount of effort you sink into being the first to do anything, unless you have a really unique, novel way to build it, somebody else can come by pretty quickly and trump you and do what you did, but for a lot less time. To answer your question, I would say it's still early. Obviously I'm experimenting with it. I mean, we're playing, I think the beacons are in a different category, just because there's so many use cases that just seem to be opened up, and it doesn't
And there's
require,
270 million of them in the world, and
Yeah.
everybody's phone.
Yeah, and compare that to, there's a couple thousand glass. Pebbles sold quite a few, I think maybe 1 million-ish Pebbles, but what you're targeting is a market that, if Apple made a watch, or Pebble just all of a sudden sold 40 million watches, that would be a really interesting market for me, because that's a much bigger, right? But if you're targeting 2,000 glass owners, or 5,000, or whatever it is, it seems to be a tough sell. So I would say let somebody else figure that one out. Build what you're going to do if you can in a different environment, and then get some traction, and then go back.
Or play with it on nights and weekends.
That's what I do. I mean, I know with the startup there is no such thing as nights and weekends, but I would make time for it. I would never. I mean, I think the only way you can be, really ahead of the curve is by playing with it and spending some time using it. And you might have a use case that is just the best, awesomest thing ever, and then I'd build it. But that's what pivots are for, I would say. I would have something that is on the path to, some kind of success. And it feels kind of dirty saying that, because we're supposed to be, the companies that are taking the big risks, and the fail fast, fail often kind of a thing, right? But that market in particular, the examples you gave, it just feels a little young, just personally. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on why WebOS was not as successful as it could have been, other than selling to HP? I mean, kind of before that.
Well, I actually do know some of the reasons. I can't say the biggest ones, but I think we misfired on a couple things. Because we had revenue attached to the release of the operating system, I think we shipped it early, and we announced that it was going to be available in June or something. We hit that date, but we weren't ready for that date, so it wasn't a polished software product at all. But people were willing. I think you can get by without having a polished anything. I think people will give you a lot more leeway than you think. We used up a lot of that leeway, but and then we had some problems with the hardware. It had some production issues. Oreoing is what we called it, or there's some minor production problems. But I think it was.
You guys announced at CES that year, right?
We announced at CES.
Then Apple in February or March announced another iPhone.
Yep.
And took away a lot of your oxygen.
Actually, no. Our biggest failure was not. And I can't really go into the details, but the biggest failure had nothing to do with that. And it's the one I think that ultimately caused us to do a quicker sale than we would have, because it was self-inflicted. It was a dumb move on our part, and it ate up a lot of our runway, a lot of our cash runway, and I think that's probably the biggest reason. And we can, but then you always want to critique what you've made, right? So you want to say, look, we did ship an early product. It wasn't finished. We needed more time, but we didn't have the time, right? So, and then the HP thing was its own debacle, right? Yeah, part of it was because the CEO that had championed us, got fired. That's never a good sign. And And the new guy that came in, Leo Apotheker, bought Autonomy for like 11 bill or 9 bill or something like that. Which was like, and he never liked us anyway. So there was all sorts of reasons why it kind of died. But WebOS, I think it's still a solid product. I think it's in LG's hands now, and they're doing some interesting stuff with it. But yeah, how are we doing on time?
We should probably kind of start to move on.
Okay,
Cool.
great,
Thanks.
awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, guys.